palace of Valdris stood tall against the night sky, its towers reaching toward the moon like fingers of stone and shadow. For 300 years, this ancient fortress had been home to vampire nobility, and for 300 years, humans had served within its cold walls under an uneasy treaty between the two races. Sejun walked through the marble corridors with his head down and his hands carrying fresh linens. He was 23 years old, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that noticed everything but revealed nothing. He had arrived at the palace only 2 months ago, assigned to work in the western wing where most servants spent their days cleaning rooms that vampires rarely used. But tonight was different. The head butler had grabbed his arm earlier that evening and thrust a rusted key into his palm. "The eastern wing needs cleaning," the old man had said, his voice trembling slightly. "No one has gone there in decades, but the king has ordered it done. You are new, so you go." Leo Jun had not asked questions. He had learned long ago that asking questions only brought trouble. His mother had taught him that before she died, whispering her final words to him as illness took her away. "Show kindness even when the world offers none," she had said. That is how we stay human in a world of monsters. He carried those words with him now as he unlocked the heavy iron door that led to the eastern wing. The hinges screamed in protest, and dust fell from above like gray snow. No torches burned here, so Seo Jun lit his own small candle and stepped inside. The corridor stretched before him, dark and forgotten. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling like curtains, and the stone floor was thick with dust that had not been disturbed in what seemed like centuries. Paintings lined the walls, their subjects hidden beneath layers of grime and neglect. Seo Jun began his work, sweeping and wiping as he moved deeper into the abandoned wing. The silence pressed against his ears, heavy and unnatural. Even the palace rats seemed to avoid this place. Then he heard it. A voice, soft and weak, drifting through the darkness like a ghost's whisper. He stopped, his broom frozen in his hands. The sound came again, so faint he almost believed he had imagined it. But no, there it was once more, coming from somewhere ahead, somewhere behind the walls themselves. His mother's voice echoed in his memory. "Run away," it seemed to say. "This is not your concern." But another part of him, the part that had held his mother's hand as she passed, the part that had buried her alone because no one else cared, that part of him moved forward. He followed the sound through twisting corridors until he reached a dead end. A massive tapestry hung on the wall, depicting a battle between vampires and some forgotten enemy. Ishijun pulled it aside and found what lay hidden beneath. A door, sealed with chains and marked with symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The voice came from behind it. Seo Jun did not understand the symbols, but he understood locks. He had picked many of them during his years on the streets before coming to the palace. These chains were old, and the lock was rusted. Within minutes, he had freed them, and they fell to the floor with a crash that echoed through the empty wing. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chamber was small and circular, lit only by a single shaft of moonlight that fell through a crack in the ceiling. And there, in the center of the room, was a woman. She was bound in silver chains that wrapped around her wrists, her ankles, and her throat. The chains were covered in strange runes that pulsed with dim light. Her dress had once been beautiful. Seo Jun could see traces of royal purple and gold thread, but now it hung in tatters, faded by time. Her skin was pale as fresh snow, and her hair, black as midnight, fell around her face in tangled waves. But her eyes were what stopped his heart. They were crimson red, glowing like embers in the darkness. Vampire eyes. She lifted her head slowly, as if even that small movement cost her great effort. Her cracked lips parted, and she spoke in a voice that was barely more than a breath. "Unchain me, human." Seo Jun stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee this place and never return. This was a vampire, a creature of the night, a monster that fed on human blood. She could kill him with a single bite. But as he stared at her, he saw something else. He saw the wounds on her wrists where the silver had burned her flesh for what must have been years. He saw the hollowness in her cheeks, the weakness in her limbs. He saw a creature that had been left here to suffer alone in the dark. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice steady despite his fear. The vampire woman studied him with those burning eyes. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "I am no one," she whispered. "I am a memory that the world has chosen to forget. I am Seraphina, firstborn daughter of King Valdris III, Princess of the Crimson Throne." Zojun felt the world tilt beneath his feet. The current king was Alaric, son of Valdris IV. There was no record of any princess in the royal family. There never had been. "That is impossible," he said. "The royal family has no princess." "They erased me," Seraphina replied, her voice growing weaker. 200 years ago, they locked me away and removed my name from every record, every memory. I have been here ever since, forgotten by time itself. Eisho Jun should have left. He should have reported this to the guards, to the head butler, to anyone who would listen. But as he looked at this broken creature, chained and starving in the darkness, he could not bring himself to abandon her. Instead, he knelt beside her and examined the chains. They were beyond his skill to break. The runes that covered them pulsed with magic he did not understand. "I cannot free you," he admitted. "Not yet." Seraphina closed her eyes, and something like despair crossed her ancient face. But Seojun was not finished. "But I will return," he said. "I will bring you water and blood. I will find a way to break these chains. I do not know why you are here or what you have done, but no creature deserves to suffer like this." Seraphina opened her eyes and stared at him. In 200 years of imprisonment, no human had ever shown her kindness. They had thrown scraps at her, tortured her, spat upon her. And now this boy, this simple servant, was promising to help her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help a monster?" Lijun stood and looked down at her. His mother's words filled his heart. "Because kindness is what makes us human," he said. "And I choose to remain human, even in a palace full of monsters." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving Seraphina alone in the darkness once more. But for the first time in 2 centuries, she felt something she had long forgotten. Hope. True to his word, Seojun returned the next night. He crept through the eastern wing with a leather pouch hidden beneath his servant's coat. Inside the pouch was animal blood he had collected from the palace kitchen, stolen from the waste buckets where butchers threw their scraps. It was not much, but it was all he could gather without raising suspicion. Seraphina was exactly where he had left her, bound in silver chains that glowed with ancient magic. When she saw him enter, her crimson eyes widened with something that might have been surprise or relief. "You came back," she said. "I thought perhaps I had dreamed you." Seojun knelt beside her and opened the pouch. He held it to her lips, and she drank slowly, her throat moving with each precious swallow. When the blood was gone, some color had returned to her pale cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "I had forgotten what it felt like to have my thirst satisfied, even a little." Seojun sat back against the cold stone wall and studied her. In the moonlight, he could see that she had once been beautiful, and still was, beneath the grime and suffering. Her features were sharp and elegant, her bearing proud despite her chains. "Will you tell me why you are here?" he asked. "What crime did you commit to deserve this punishment?" Seraphina was silent for a long moment. Then she closed her eyes and began to speak. 200 years ago, I was the pride of the Valdris dynasty," she said. "The firstborn daughter of King Valdris III, heir to the Crimson Throne. My father loved me above all things, or so I believed. He taught me a rule: to fight, to command. I thought I would be a great queen one day." She paused, and pain flickered across her face. "But there was a tradition in our kingdom," she continued. "A tradition that had existed since the founding of our people. It was called the Blood Harvest." Jun felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard whispers of the Blood Harvest from the older servants. It was a dark chapter in vampire history, a time when human beings were hunted like animals for sport. Every decade, the noble families would gather for the hunt, Serafina said. They would release human prisoners into the forest and chase them down like prey. It was considered a great honor to participate. The vampire who caught the most humans earned glory and recognition. Her voice grew bitter. "I was 18 when my father told me it was time for me to join the hunt. He presented me with a silver bow and arrows blessed with ancient magic. He said I would make him proud." Jun leaned forward, captivated by her words. "What did you do?" he asked. Serafina opened her eyes and met his gaze. "I refused," she said simply. "I had watched the hunt as a child, hidden in the shadows where no one could see me. I had seen the terror in the humans' eyes as they ran. I had heard their screams as they were caught, and I had felt sick to my very soul." She shook her head slowly. "I told my father that I would not participate. I called the tradition barbaric and cruel. I said that we were monsters if we treated living beings as nothing more than prey." "And your father?" Jun asked. "How did he respond?" "He was furious," Serafina replied. "He demanded that I apologize, that I take back my words and join the hunt like a proper princess. But I refused again. I stood before the entire court and declared that the blood harvest was an abomination that must be abolished." Her eyes grew distant with memory. The nobles were outraged. My father's face turned red with rage and humiliation. I had shamed him before his entire kingdom. For a vampire king, there's no greater insult. She fell silent, and Jun understood what must have come next. "He punished you," he said quietly. "He could not execute me," Serafina replied. "I was his firstborn, his heir. To kill me would have caused a scandal that might have destroyed our dynasty. So instead, he found another way." Tears glistened in her crimson eyes. "He gathered his most powerful sorcerers and had them forge these chains," she said, lifting her bound wrists. "Chains that would hold even the strongest vampire. Then he brought me here, to this forgotten chamber, and locked me away." "But how could he erase you from history?" Jun asked. "Surely people remembered you." "Magic," Serafina said bitterly. "Dark magic that should never have been used. The sorcerers cast a spell over the entire kingdom, erasing all memory of my existence. Documents were burned, paintings were destroyed, and the minds of our people were wiped clean. Within a year, no one remembered that Princess Serafina had ever lived." Jun sat in stunned silence. The cruelty of it was almost beyond comprehension. To be erased from existence, to be forgotten by everyone who had ever known you, it was a fate worse than death. "What happened to the blood harvest?" he asked. A strange smile crossed Seraphi's face. "It was abolished," she said. "Not immediately, but gradually. After I was gone, my younger brother Valdris IV grew up hearing stories of the hunt. But without my voice to challenge him, it took him longer to understand the truth. Eventually, he saw the cruelty for what it was and ended the tradition." She looked at Jun with something like pride. "I never learned this from my captors, of course. But I could hear through the walls sometimes, servants gossiping as they passed. The blood harvest ended 50 years after my imprisonment. My sacrifice was not entirely in vain." Jun felt his heart ache for this woman. She had given up everything, her freedom, her identity, her very existence, to stand against injustice. and she had been punished for 200 years because of it. "I will free you," he said. "I do not know how, but I will find a way." Seraphina shook her head sadly. "These chains cannot be broken by ordinary means," she said. "They are bound by blood magic. Only blood freely given by one of pure intent can shatter the runes." "Then I will give my blood," Seo-jun said without hesitation. Seraphina stared at him in disbelief. "You would do that for me?" she asked. "You would risk your life for a vampire you barely know." Seo-jun thought of his mother, of her gentle hands and her kind heart. He thought of all the cruelty he had witnessed in his life, all the injustice he had been powerless to stop. But here, in this forgotten chamber, he had the power to make a difference. "You chose to stand against evil, even when it cost you everything," he said. "How can I do any less?" He rose to his feet and looked down at her. "I will return tomorrow night with what we need," he promised. "And then, Princess Seraphina, you will finally be free." As he slipped out of the chamber and disappeared into the darkness, neither of them noticed the shadow that moved in the corridor beyond. Neither of them saw the figure that had followed Seo-jun from the western wing. Head servant Myung-hee stepped back from the doorway, her old eyes wide with shock. She had suspected the young man was hiding something, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined this. A forgotten princess, chained in silver and darkness, and a human boy foolish enough to try to save her. Aljun was gathering supplies in the kitchen when a hand grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. He found himself face to face with Myung-hee, the head servant of the Western Wing. She was an old woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too much of the world. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone her age. "We need to talk," she said in a low voice. "Now, in private." Before Aljun could respond, she dragged him into a small storage room and closed the door behind them. In the dim light, her face was hard and unreadable. "I followed you last night," she said. "I saw everything. The chamber, the chains, and the woman." Seo-jun felt his blood run cold. If Myung-hee reported him to the palace guards, he would be executed before sunrise. Humans who conspired with vampires against the crown were shown no mercy. "Please," he began, but Myung-hee held up her hand. "I did not say I was going to turn you in," she said. "I said we need to talk." She leaned against a shelf of dried herbs and crossed her arms. "I am old enough to remember things that others have forgotten," she said. "When I was a young girl, there were whispers among the servants. Stories of a princess who vanished in the night, erased from history by dark magic. Most people thought it was just a legend, a ghost story to frighten children." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "But I always wondered if it was true. And now I know." Seo-jun stared at her in surprise. "You believe her story?" he asked. Myung-hee nodded slowly. "I believe it because I saw the royal crest on her dress," she said. "That crest has not been used in 200 years. It belonged to King Valdres III, who died long before I was born. If she were lying, how would she have that dress?" She paused and took a deep breath. "But there is another reason I believe her," she continued. "A more personal reason." "What reason?" Seo-jun asked. Pain flickered across the old woman's face. "When I was a child, my grandfather told me stories," she said. "Stories of the blood harvest, of humans hunted like animals in the forest. He told me that his own brother, my great-uncle, was taken in one of those hunts. He never came back." Tears glistened in her eyes. "For years, I hated all vampires because of what they did to my family. But then I learned that the blood harvest was abolished by King Valdres IV, decades before I was born. I wondered why he would end such a tradition when his father had embraced it." She looked at Seo-jun with fierce intensity. "Now I know. It was because of her, the princess who stood against evil and paid the price." She is the reason my family was never hunted. The reason I grew up free instead of as prey. Yeo-jung felt hope bloom in his chest. Then you will help us, he asked. Myung-hee straightened her back and nodded. I will help you free her, she said. Tell me what you need. That night, the two of them crept through the eastern wing together. Myung-hee carried a small knife and bandages, while Seo-jun held a torch to light their way. When they entered the hidden chamber, Serafina looked up with alarm. Who is this? She demanded, her crimson eyes fixed on Myung-hee. A friend, Seo-jun said quickly. She knows your story, and she wants to help. Myung-hee stepped forward and bowed her head. Your Highness, she said. I am Myung-hee, daughter of servants who lived in fear of the blood harvest. My family owes you a debt we can never repay. If not for your sacrifice, my grandfather might have been hunted like his brother. Serafina stared at the old woman for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. You have my thanks, she said. But I warn you, what we are about to do is dangerous. If we are caught, you will both be killed. We understand the risk, Seo-jun said. Now tell us what to do. Serafina explained the nature of the chains. The runes that bound them were powered by blood magic, dark sorcery that fed on hatred and cruelty. To break them, they needed blood given freely, willingly, by someone whose intentions were pure. The magic will test your heart, Serafina warned. If there is any darkness in you, any hidden malice or selfish desire, the chains will not break. They may even strike back and harm you. Seo-jun rolled up his sleeve without hesitation. My heart is clear, he said. I want nothing but to right an ancient wrong. Myung-hee handed him the knife, and he pressed the blade against his palm. The steel bit into his flesh, and blood welled up from the wound bright red against his skin. He held his hand over the chains and let the blood drip onto the glowing runes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the runes began to pulse faster, brighter, as if they were alive. The chains trembled and shook, and a high-pitched whine filled the chamber. Seo-jun felt something probing his mind, searching through his memories and emotions. He thought of his mother, of her kindness and love. He thought of Serafina, suffering alone in the darkness. He thought of all the people who had ever been hurt by cruelty and injustice. And he thought of his deepest wish, not for wealth or power, but simply for a world where kindness mattered. The whine became a scream, and then the chains exploded. Silver links flew across the chamber, clattering against the stone walls. The runes flared one final time, and then went dark forever. Serafina fell forward, freed from her bonds after 200 years of captivity. Seo-jun caught her before she hit the ground. She was so light, so fragile, weakened by centuries of starvation. But her eyes burned with life. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. Myung-hee hurried forward to help support the princess. Together, they lifted her to her feet. Can you walk? Seo-jun asked. Serafina nodded weakly. I think so, she said. But I am so hungry. 200 years without proper feeding. My body is barely functional. Her eyes flickered to Sao-chun's bleeding hand, and for a moment, something dangerous flashed in her crimson gaze. But then she looked away, clenching her jaw with visible effort. I will not bite you, she said through gritted teeth. You trusted me with your blood. I will not betray that trust. Before anyone could respond, a horn sounded in the distance, a deep, resonant blast that echoed through the palace. The alarm, Myung-hee gasped. They must have detected the magical disturbance when the chains broke. Footsteps thundered in the corridor beyond, growing louder with each passing second. Guards were coming, dozens of them, racing toward the eastern wing. Seraphine's eyes hardened with determination. Then we have no time to waste, she said. If I am to face my fate, I will do it on my feet. Take me to the throne room. Yeojun and Myung-hee exchanged worried glances. The throne room meant facing the king himself. But Serafina was right. There was no running from this. Together, the three of them moved toward the door, ready to confront whatever waited beyond. The corridors of the palace erupted into chaos. Guards rushed through the hallways, their armor clanking and their weapons drawn. Servants screamed and fled, pressing themselves against the walls as the soldiers charged past. Somewhere in the distance, more horns sounded, calling every vampire warrior to arms. Yeojun and Myung-hee have carried Serafina through the madness, moving as quickly as her weakened body would allow. The princess leaned heavily on their shoulders, her legs trembling with each step, but her eyes remained fierce and focused. "The throne room is this way," Myung-hee said, guiding them down a side passage. "If we hurry, we might reach it before the guards cut us off." They rounded a corner and nearly collided with a squad of armored vampires. The soldiers raised their spears, their red eyes glowing with alarm. "Halt!" the captain shouted. "Who goes there?" Serafina lifted her head and met his gaze. "I am Princess Serafina of House Valdres," she declared, her voice ringing with authority despite her weakness. "Firstborn daughter of King Valdres III, rightful heir to the Crimson Throne. Stand aside." The captain hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. He looked at his men, then back at the ragged woman before him. Clearly, he did not recognize her. No one would, after 200 years, but something in her bearing gave him pause. "There is no princess," he said uncertainly. "You are lying." "Then take me to the king," Serafina replied. "Let him decide if I speak the truth." The captain considered this for a moment, then nodded sharply. "Very well," he said. "You three will come with us. But if this is some kind of trick, you will all die screaming." Surrounded by guards, they marched through the palace toward the throne room. Word spread quickly, and by the time they arrived, a crowd had gathered. Noble vampires in silk robes, servants in simple clothes, and warriors in gleaming armor, all of them stared at the strange procession with curiosity and fear. The doors to the throne room swung open, and they entered. King Alaric sat upon the crimson throne, a massive chair carved from blood-red stone and decorated with the bones of ancient enemies. He was a handsome vampire with silver hair and coal-blue eyes, unusual for his kind, who typically had crimson gazes. A crown of black iron rested upon his brow. When he saw the guards escorting a ragged woman and two human servants, his expression darkened with annoyance. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. "Why have you brought these creatures before me?" The captain bowed low. "Your Majesty, this woman claims to be Princess Serafina, firstborn of your grandfather King Valdres III. She says she is the rightful heir to the Crimson Throne." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nobles whispered to each other, their faces pale with shock. The name Serafina meant nothing to any of them. How could it, when all memory of her had been erased? But the claim itself was extraordinary. King Alaric rose from his throne, his eyes fixed on Serafina. "Impossible," he said coldly. "My grandfather had only one child, my father, Valdres IV. There was no princess. This woman is clearly mad or lying." Serafina stepped forward, shaking off the hands of her human companions. Though she could barely stand, she held herself with the dignity of royalty. "I am neither mad nor lying," she said. "I am your Aunt Alaric, your father's elder sister. I was imprisoned 200 years ago because I refused to participate in the blood harvest. Your grandfather erased me from history to hide his shame." The king's face twisted with anger. "Guards, seize her," he commanded. "She will be executed for this insult to my family." But before the guards could move, something strange happened. The crimson throne began to glow. Ancient runes carved into the blood-red stone rooms that had been dormant for centuries suddenly flared to life. A brilliant light pulsed through the throne room, and a deep hum filled the air. King Alaric stumbled back in shock. "What sorcery is this?" he gasped. An old vampire, dressed in the robes of a court historian, pushed his way through the crowd. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Your Majesty," he cried. "The throne is reacting to her bloodline." This magic was set in place by the first Valdris king to identify the true heir. It only activates in the presence of royal blood. He pointed at Seraphina with a trembling finger. "She is telling the truth. She is of the Valdris bloodline, and based on the strength of the reaction, she is a direct descendant of the main line." Chaos erupted in the throne room. Nobles shouted in confusion and fear. Some demanded that Seraphina be killed immediately, while others called for an investigation. The guards looked to their king for guidance, but Alaric seemed frozen in shock. Isujun watched the pandemonium with growing dread. He could see that some of the older nobles, those who might have known about Seraphine's imprisonment, were whispering urgently to each other. If they convinced the king to act quickly, she would be killed before the truth could come out. He had to do something. Before he could stop himself, he stepped forward and raised his voice. "Your Majesty," he shouted. "Hear me." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to the young human servant who dared to address the vampire king. Alaric's cold gaze settled on Sojun. "You dare speak in my presence," he said dangerously. "A human has no right to address the king." "I have every right," Sojun replied, his voice steady despite his fear. "Because I have seen what your ancestors did. I found Princess Seraphina in a hidden chamber in the eastern wing, chained in silver and left to suffer for 200 years. I freed her with my own blood." He gestured at Seraphina, who stood tall despite her weakness. "This woman refused to hunt humans for sport," he continued. "She called the blood harvest barbaric and stood against her own father to defend my people. And for that crime, for showing mercy, she was erased from history." He looked around the throne room, meeting the eyes of vampires and humans alike. "Is this the kind of kingdom you wish to rule?" he asked. "One that punishes compassion and rewards cruelty. One that imprisons those who dare to speak the truth." A young vampire noble stepped forward from the crowd. He was perhaps 30 in appearance, with dark hair and earnest eyes. "The humans speak sense," he said. "The blood harvest was an abomination. My own father told me stories of how ashamed our family was to have participated in such savagery. If this woman truly stood against it, she is a hero, not a criminal." Other young nobles began to murmur in agreement. They had been raised in a different era, a time after the hunt had been abolished. To them, the old ways were shameful relics of a darker age. King Alaric looked at the faces around him. He saw the older nobles, pale with fear that their complicity might be exposed. He saw the younger nobles, eager to distance themselves from the sins of their ancestors. And he saw his own reflection in the glowing throne, a king who had to choose between truth and lies. His shoulders sagged. "Bring the historians," he commanded quietly. "Search the hidden archives for any records that might have survived the purge. I want to know the truth, all of it." As servants rushed to obey, Seraphina met Xiaochun's eyes across the throne room. A small smile crossed her lips, grateful, proud, and full of hope. The battle was not yet won, but for the first time in 200 years, the truth had a chance to emerge. 3 days passed before the historians completed their work. They searched the deepest vaults of the palace, breaking seals that had not been touched in 2 centuries. They found hidden documents, burned but not entirely destroyed. They discovered portraits with faces scratched out, their frames still bearing faded nameplates. And in the personal journals of King Valdris III himself, they found the truth. The king had written everything. His anger at his daughter's defiance, his decision to imprison her rather than execute her, his use of dark magic to erase her from memory. It was all there, recorded in his own hand. He had kept the journals as a secret record, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps out of pride that he had dealt with a rebellious child so thoroughly. Now, 200 years later, his words condemned him. King Alaric called a gathering in the throne room to hear the findings. Every noble in the kingdom attended, along with hundreds of servants and common folk who crowded into the galleries above. Seraphina stood at the center of the room, dressed now in clean clothes provided by sympathetic servants. As Eugene and Myung-hee stood beside her, refusing to leave her side. The chief historian stepped forward, holding the ancient journals in his trembling hands. "Your Majesty," he began, "the evidence is undeniable. Princess Seraphina was indeed the firstborn child of King Valdris III. She was imprisoned in the year 1824 for refusing to participate in the blood harvest and for publicly condemning the practice. Her father used forbidden blood magic to erase all memory of her existence. He bowed his head. Everything she has claimed is true." A heavy silence fell over the throne room. King Alaric sat rigid on his throne, his face pale and drawn. For 3 days he had wrestled with this revelation, struggling to accept that his family's proud history was built on such terrible cruelty. Finally, he rose to his feet. "Princess Seraphina," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "I cannot undo the crimes of my ancestors. I cannot give back the 2 centuries that were stolen from you. But I can acknowledge the truth, and I can ensure that justice is finally served." He descended from his throne and walked toward her. When he reached her, he did something that shocked everyone present. He knelt before her. "You are my aunt," he said, "the elder sister of my father. By the laws of our kingdom, you are the rightful heir to the Crimson Throne. I offer it to you now, along with my most sincere apology for what our family has done." Seraphina looked down at the kneeling king, and her expression softened. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Rise, nephew," she said gently. "I have no desire for the throne. 200 years in darkness taught me that power is meaningless without wisdom, and I have been away from the world for too long to rule it." She helped him to his feet. "Keep your crown," she continued. "You have shown courage in facing the truth when it would have been easier to hide it. That is the mark of a good king." Relief flooded Alaric's face, but also something deeper respect. "Then, what would you have?" he asked. "Name any reward and it shall be yours." Seraphina smiled and turned to look at Sojun. "I ask only one thing," she said. "This human risked his life to save me. He saw a monster in chains and chose to show kindness instead of fear. I ask that he be rewarded for his courage." She turned back to the king. "But more than that, I ask for change. For too long, humans have been treated as servants and lesser beings in this kingdom. They deserve to be treated as equals, as partners in building a better world. I ask that you begin the process of reform, of breaking down the barriers between our peoples." King Alaric nodded slowly. "It shall be done," he said. "From this day forward, humans in our kingdom shall have the same rights as vampires. They may own property, hold positions of authority, and live as free citizens. Any who mistreat them will face the full weight of royal justice." A cheer erupted from the galleries, where hundreds of human servants wept with joy. For generations, they had lived as second-class citizens, bound to serve their vampire masters. Now, in a single moment, their world had changed. The king raised his hand for silence. "Furthermore," he continued, "I publicly condemn the actions of my ancestors. The blood harvest was a stain upon our kingdom's honor, and those who participated in it, including my own family, were guilty of terrible crimes. We cannot change the past, but we can vow to never repeat it." He looked at Seraphina with genuine warmth. "And I recognize Princess Seraphina as a hero of our kingdom. Her name shall be restored to all records, her portrait hung in the Hall of Honor, and her story taught to every child so that future generations may learn from her courage." The crowd erupted in applause. Nobles who had once whispered against her now bowed their heads in respect. Servants who had never dared to dream of freedom wept openly. In the midst of the celebration, Seraphina found Seo-jun and took his hands in hers. "I owe you everything," she said quietly. "You saw a monster and chose to show kindness. You risked your life for someone you barely knew. How can I ever repay you?" Seo-jun shook his head. "You do not owe me anything," he replied. "I only did what my mother taught me, to show kindness even when the world offers none. Seeing you free, seeing this kingdom begin to change, that is all the reward I need." Seraphina smiled, and for a moment, she looked not like a 200-year-old vampire princess, but like a young woman seeing hope for the first time. "Then stay with me," she said. "Not as a servant, but as a partner. I have been alone for so long, and I do not wish to face this new world without a friend beside me." Seo-jun felt warmth bloom in his chest. "I would be honored," he said. The days that followed brought tremendous change to the Palace of Valdris. Old laws were overturned, new councils were formed, and for the first time in history, humans and vampires began to work together as equals. It was not easy. Centuries of prejudice could not be erased overnight, but the seeds of a better future had been planted. Seraphina became an advisor to the king, using her wisdom to guide the kingdom through its transformation. Myung-hee was appointed to lead a new council of human representatives, giving voice to those who had been silent for too long. And Seo-jun remained at Seraphine's side, not as a servant, but as her closest companion. One evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Seraphina stood on a palace balcony and watched the sky turn red and gold. She had not seen a sunset in 200 years, and the beauty of it brought tears to her eyes. Seo-jun joined her, standing quietly at her side. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Seraphina was silent for a moment. Then she smiled. "I am thinking that you unchained more than my body," she said. "You unchained this entire palace. You reminded us all that kindness is stronger than cruelty, that hope can survive even the darkest night." She turned to look at him, and in her crimson eyes he saw gratitude, affection, and something that might have been love. "Thank you, Seo-jun," she whispered. "Thank you for setting me free." Together, they watched as darkness fell over the kingdom, but it was a different kind of darkness now. A darkness that held the promise of dawn.